Alright, I apologize for any continuity errors here. I'm filming the second episode at the same time I'm filming the first. But in this episode, I want to get the bike running now that we determined the electronics all work and it cleans up decently. So, a little bit of history on this bike. The guy who sold it to me actually never had it running. He only had it for about a year and was hoping to work on it, never got around to it. The guy who sold it to him bought it in, I think, 2014, and it was registered most recently in 2021, so I know it was running then. He did a lot of trail riding and whatnot. However, when he sold it to the guy who sold it to me, it was not running, and it didn't have compression. And the guy who sold it to me never really did any work on it, just bought a couple parts. And so I'm getting it how it's been for the last 3 years, which is not running because of a lack of compression. So let's start with a compression test. So I thought it'd be a good idea to talk real quick about how these compression testers work, because initially I didn't understand why it took multiple kicks to get an accurate reading of the compression. The way to think about these testers is that your gauge here is like a tire and your engine is like an air compressor. So if your air compressor is at 150 psi and you just give it a little blip filling your tire is not going to be at 150 psi. You need to let it fill up and equalize pressure. Well, the same thing happens with the engine. When you kick it over, you're just giving it a little blip of the full compression of the engine. So, let's say your engine has 100 pounds of pressure. If you kick it once, it might only have enough time to fill up the gauge 20 pounds. So you have to kick it a number of times and it'll max out at the maximum pressure of the engine. But the reading you get is the compression on each stroke. So I hope that explanation helped a little bit. There's definitely some confusion for me about how these gauges work, but I think the tire air compressor idea helped me understand them. So now that we got that all set up, we're going to hold the throttle wide open to minimize any air drag, and we're going to give this a couple kicks over until it stops increasing the reading on the gauge. Alright, so I don't know if this has to do with the $15 gauge I got off Amazon, but the previous owner told me that it was 50 pounds of pressure. I actually did a test a couple days ago and got 75. Well, I just did another. When I really gave it heavy kicks, I was actually able to get it up to 100. So this compression issue seems fairly minimal, and I'm just going to go off the advice that the previous owner told me, which is to check the valve clearances and adjust them and see if we can get that number a little higher. Alright, so like I said, the first thing I want to do is check these valve clearances, because if they're a little too tight, then it would be holding a valve slightly open, and that would obviously lead to a lack of compression. So I actually had to go out and buy one of these 23mm sockets, but let's see. So there's the intake. There's some oil in the exhaust tappet, and that's a good thing. I mean, it's pretty dirty, but that's good. It means we're getting oil circulation all the way to the top of the engine. Obviously, that's more of a worry in your vertically oriented engines. Horizontally, I can imagine the oil flow is a little easier. Alright, so obviously to adjust the valves, you want the piston at top dead center after the compression stroke. And so to make sure of that, I'm going to take off the stator cover here, and we're going to look for the T index mark. Alright, so just like the 450, there is some oil in the stator area, and there are O-rings on each of the screws for that cover. So this is the flywheel and the index mark here, and what we're looking for is this T mark on the flywheel for top dead center, but we also need it to be top dead center after the compression stroke, not after the exhaust stroke. And so what you're going to see as you're turning this counterclockwise is that at one point before the T, the intake valve will open. Just now it's opening. And so you want to bring it around to the next time the T comes around, and that's after the compression stroke. And you can go and use a flashlight and look inside the cylinder and see that both valves are closed at this point. So now that we know the valve is in its fully closed position, we can check the clearance between the rocker arm and the valve. So the manual calls for 2000, so I have my feeler gauge, and I'm going to try to slip it in between the rocker arm and that valve, and it is very tight. I can't seem to get that in there. So what I'm going to do is loosen this nut here, and then there is a tool for this little square bolt here, but I'm just going to try to use this adjustable wrench. And basically all you're doing is you're locking this bolt. So if I pull it all the way out, you can see we have lots of clearance there. And so what I want to do is bring it down to the point where it's just barely biting on my 2000th feeler gauge. Like about there. So this is something, it feels like I can kind of just do by hand. And then if I go ahead and tighten that nut down, it is going to tighten the bolt a little bit with it. So you can see that actually made it too tight. So loosen it again. Loosen the whole piece. Now ideally you would have some other tools for this so that you could hold the bolt in place, but I don't have a 9mm wrench, I only have this socket. Let me feel that now. If I tighten that down, still a little tight. Alright, so that might be a hair loose, but I'm going to keep it as is now so I can at least check the compression. But first I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing to the exhaust valve. It's the same clearance, 2000ths, and the same process. Alright, so now I'm down at the exhaust valve, and I already felt for clearance it's a little tight, so I'm going to loosen this. Alright, so that feels pretty good. I can pretty easily slip in the 2000s gauge there. Alright, so now that we got those valves adjusted, let's do another compression test and see if we made any difference. Alright, that's definitely a difference. This is up now at 120 psi. Let me check what the spec is for compression and see where we're at. So, 120 is an improvement, but ideally it'd be somewhere around 150 to 170. So my next thought is that maybe the piston rings aren't seating properly because the bike's been sitting for a couple of years. So the way to test for that is I'm going to pour some engine oil, this is the same stuff that I used on the 450, down into the cylinder, and then I'm going to do another compression test, and if the compression is a lot better, that means that the oil is doing what the piston rings should be doing, and it's the piston rings that are causing the lack of compression. I also went ahead and pulled the intake manifold and the carb because this aftermarket carb doesn't actually open all the way, and I was worried I was going to get some air drag. Alright, that is more like it, 145. Alright, so it's been a couple days since I put that oil in the cylinder, and I've been kicking it over every couple days, and actually the compression test has stayed around 140, 145, and that's still not quite where I'd like it to be. But I thought, before going any further, now that the compression is at least somewhat in the range, and kind of just for fun, I want to see if we can get this thing to start. So I tightened back down the spark plug. I did like a really quick clean of the carb jets. I poured some gas just into the carb bowl, threw the exhaust back on, and put the battery in, so I think we're ready to go. I have some starting fluid here. gonna pour some more gas into the bowl here. I just poured some gas directly into the carb. Oh, I don't think it's getting gas at all. I think that's just starting fluid. That sounds pretty good, huh? Alright, I poured some more gas into the carb. Not bad. I think I'm getting gas to get down into the bowl there. I actually ended up blowing through this tube and I must have knocked something loose. When you saw that tank in the last episode, this gas was pretty old. So I imagine it'd be clogged up. This is fresh gas though. Yeah, I'm actually able to get a lot through that tube if I just blow down it. Now it's flowing pretty good. I think if we can fill the bowl, we can get it to idle for at least, 20 seconds. Maybe longer. These things apparently get really good gas mileage. Alright, I think that's full. This doesn't want to give me any more. Yeah, so I only mounted the exhaust at the engine. Alright, I'm just going to zip tie the exhaust up to this luggage rack. Oh yeah. That's pretty good. All right, I'm tired of kicking that thing. But man, that sounds good. So that sounded pretty good. It was a lot of fun getting it running and listening to it. I'm kind of tired of kicking it over, but I was hoping it would run for a little longer so we could see if those piston rings would seat and we could get a better compression reading. But I don't see that happening with this carb. That gas, you saw the gas tank in the last episode, that gas is all gummed up and I'm sure some of the jets are clogged. And it's an aftermarket carb, which I don't really trust, even though the previous owner said he got it to run better with this than the original. I actually went ahead and ordered an OEM carb. I have the original carb off this bike, and I'm going to kind of combine parts to get a complete one. I have the air filter, so I'd really like to get that going. And then I've been thinking about it for the last week or so, and about this compression reading. And I think I kind of want to take the engine out and go through, replace the rings, hone the cylinder, grind the valves. I think that would definitely solve the compression issue once and for all. And at the same time, there's tons of dirt and crap all like between the fins and everywhere, like real tough, like clay dirt. So I think it'd be a good idea, just in general, to get the engine out and give it a good deep cleaning, and go through everything. So I'm probably going to end up doing that in one of these next episodes. But hey, for a bike that wasn't running when I bought it and just need a little valve adjustment to hear it get going, that's pretty exciting. And if all I cared about was riding on a trail and crashing this thing like the last guy cared about, I'd probably just clean this car and call it a day. But I'd like to do a little bit more of a cleanup and a restoration. So, like I said, I'm going to try to get that engine out in one of these upcoming episodes. On top of that, there's a lot more work coming up for this thing. Been working on some turn signal brackets to better mount everything because the turn signal mounting was rough. I want to clean up and repaint the exhaust. New cables. There's a lot of work to do, but I'm really excited about this project. I'm really excited that we got to hear it get going. So thank you for watching. All right, one more time.